Election season, right. Everyone's glued to the polls, the debates, the talking heads.
It's a circus out there.
Totally. But let's be real. You're not here for the circus. You want to know what's really going on, what the markets are whispering about?
Exactly. While everyone's watching the debates, smart money's watching the markets. Things like specific trades, asset flows. They're far more reliable than any poll, any pundit.
To forget the campaign speeches, we need to follow the money.
100%. Let's look at the upcoming election, for example. We're seeing a fascinating trend with Trump Media and Technology Group, the DJT stock. Since September 24th, it's surged. Get this, over 200%.
Wow, that's huge.
It is. And simultaneously, we're seeing U.S. financial stocks climbing as well.
So what you're saying is some pretty big players are placing their bets on a specific outcome, trying to get ahead of the curve, maybe make a killing.
It definitely suggests a level of confidence in either a potential Trump victory or, at the very least, confidence in the types of policies a Trump administration might put in place. And this sentiment, it's going way beyond what we're seeing reflected in those traditional polls.
Okay, so takeaway number one for our listeners. If you want to know what's really going to happen, watch where the big money's flowing, not just the polls. But how do we actually use this information, this insight into the market sentiment to make smart trading decisions right now?
That, my friend, is the million-dollar question. And it leads us to an asset that's been making quite a bit of noise lately. Bitcoin.
Bitcoin. It's everywhere these days, but why is it the asset to watch right now, especially considering everything we've just talked about with the election?
Well, look at how BlackRock is entering the Bitcoin space. They're not just casually buying on the open market. They're creating these very specific products structured to attract institutional investors. This very deliberate approach tells us they see Bitcoin as a long-term play, not just a passing fad.
So BlackRock, arguably the biggest asset manager globally, is essentially saying, hey, Bitcoin is here to stay. What are we seeing in the market right now that supports this? What signals are flashing green?
Well, for one, the open interest in Bitcoin perpetual futures contracts, those have surged to a cycle high of $21 billion. That's massive.
Okay, so big numbers, big players. What are traders actually doing with this information, though? Is it just a matter of everyone piling into Bitcoin right now?
That's always an option, but it's important to have a strategy. One really interesting approach being discussed right now is selling S&P 500 puts and buying Bitcoin calls.
Okay, break that down for me a bit. When you say selling puts, you're basically saying, I don't think the S&P 500 is going to crash.
Precisely. You're essentially making a bet that the S&P 500 won't crash and that Bitcoin will outperform traditional equities. You're strategically leveraging the divergence we're seeing in the market between declining equity volatility and the rising volatility of Bitcoin.
So a calculated risk for sure, but with the potential for a big payoff if everything unfolds the way some are predicting.
Exactly. It all comes down to understanding the potential, managing your risk, and being adaptable as the market shifts.
This is all great stuff for Bitcoin, but what about some of the other players in the crypto space? Specifically, what about Ethereum?
Now that's where things get even more interesting. While Bitcoin's stealing the show right now, Ethereum might just be the dark horse in this race, poised for some significant gains, especially as we look ahead to 2025.
Really? 2025, what's the story there? What's got everyone so bullish on Ethereum, but specifically a couple of years out?
Well, remember how we were just talking about BlackRock and their big move into Bitcoin?
Yeah, they're all in.
Right, and right now they're really pushing that whole Bitcoin as digital gold narrative. However, there are some very strong signals suggesting they're getting ready to shift their focus to Ethereum in the coming years.
Okay, so BlackRock is bullish on Ethereum, but waiting for the right time to strike. Is this something traders should be looking at now, or is it a wait-and-see situation?
It's all about timing the market. Remember Larry Fink?
BlackRock's CEO, yeah, the guy who can practically move markets with a whisper.
Exactly. And every single time he's mentioned Bitcoin on CNBC this year, boom, the price jumps. And get this, he's already hinted at Ethereum's potential.
Really? What did he say?
He called Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs stepping stones towards tokenization. He sees that as the future of finance.
So they're setting the stage for a big Ethereum push down the line, and if BlackRock throws its weight behind it, that's going to be huge for the price of ETH, right?
It's not just hype, though. The technicals, they're backing it up, too. Ethereum, it's broken above its downtrend resistance line, just like Bitcoin has. And the weekly stochastics, they look really bullish.
Suggesting a move upwards is coming.
Yeah, significant upward movement. All the elements are there for a breakout, really.
Okay, so BlackRock likes it. The charts look good. Should we be buying ETH? What's the play here for traders?
Well, timing is key with everything, right? Buying Ethereum on those dips, especially in that $2,300, $2,700 range, that seems like a solid strategy.
And that range has historically been a strong support level, right?
Yeah.
So if those rallies do happen, getting in early in that range, that could be very, very profitable. We've talked about those long-term holds, though. What about some shorter-term action? What can traders look at if they want to make some moves over the next few weeks, maybe get a little more volatile?
For those traders, the ones who maybe have a bit of an appetite for risk, MicroStrategy is a fascinating case study.
Oh, yeah. They've gone all in on Bitcoin.
All in. Basically becoming a Bitcoin proxy.
It's almost like they're hitching their wagon to Bitcoin and just holding on for dear life.
Essentially, yeah. Their stock price, it's incredibly correlated with Bitcoin's performance, but with the potential for even bigger swings. In both directions, of course.
So for traders who aren't afraid of a little, or maybe a lot, of risk, MicroStrategy gives them a way to amplify those Bitcoin bets. But what are some specific dates or events that could really make MicroStrategy, and by extension Bitcoin, go on a wild ride?
Get ready, because the next 8 weeks are going to be wild. First up, the U.S. presidential election, November 5th.
Big day.
Huge. Depending on the outcome, and just as importantly, the market's reaction, we could see a big swing in MicroStrategy's price.
Especially with all this talk about cash on the sidelines, investors are ready to make moves.
They're just waiting for a reason.
No.
Then, the day after the election, November 6th, MicroStrategy announces their quarterly earnings.
That's a 1-2 punch right there.
For sure. And this is where things get really interesting for traders. The options market, it's already pricing in some major volatility around that earnings date.
Yeah, the implied volatility for MicroStrategy options is crazy high right now, even higher than Bitcoin's. What's driving all that frenzy?
Traders are rolling their call options specifically to dates surrounding the election and those earnings announcements. They're clearly anticipating some big price moves.
So what kinds of moves are we talking about here? And how can our listeners use this information to their advantage? What should they be watching out for?
We could see a gamma squeeze where market makers get caught off guard and are forced to buy more stock to hedge their positions, which of course would drive the price even higher. It's like a chain reaction, really, with each of these events feeding into the next. And then on November 7th, the FOMC meets to discuss interest rates. Any hints about further rate cuts? Well, that could add fuel to the fire.
Lower interest rates, more money flowing into the market, higher demand for assets like MicroStrategy and Bitcoin.
Exactly.
Lower interest rates, more money flowing into the market, higher demand for assets like MicroStrategy and Bitcoin. It's a beautiful cycle for those on the right side of the trade. But there's even more happening with MicroStrategy over the next few weeks, right?
Oh, there's always more. Always something to watch, you know. Keep an eye out. Around November 15th, we get those 13F filings. Those are going to show us what the big institutional investors are holding. Could be some surprises there. And then mark your calendars for December 6th.
December 6th. What's happening then? Another FOMC meeting.
Not this time. This one could be even bigger, potentially. December 6th is when S&P Global, they might announce that MicroStrategy is being added to the S&P 500 index.
Wait, hold on. If MicroStrategy gets listed on the S&P 500, that's huge, isn't it?
It would be massive. We're talking a game changer. Index funds, they would be forced to buy shares, which squeezes out those short sellers, and that sends MicroStrategy well, you can imagine.
Soaring.
Exactly. And since their price is so closely tied to Bitcoin, it could even launch Bitcoin into a whole new bull run.
Wow, that's okay. So let's recap for our listeners who are taking notes here. We've got a potentially explosive election, major earnings announcements, the FOMC playing with interest rates, a possible S&P 500 listing. Oh,
Right.
And don't forget about those accounting rule changes.
Right. Those could have a big impact on how companies value their Bitcoin holdings. It's a lot to keep track of.
It really is. The next 8 weeks are going to be absolutely wild. So for our listeners who are ready to ride this wave, what should they be doing right now?
Don't wait. The markets, they're primed for action. Don't wait for those traditional sources to catch up. By the time they do, you've already missed the boat. Understand these catalysts, manage your risk, and be ready to act decisively.
Be ready to act. I like it. This is definitely not a time to be sitting on the sidelines. Any last nuggets of wisdom for our listeners before we wrap things up?
Remember that question we posed earlier? All that cash waiting on the sidelines? What if the real FOMO, the fear of missing out that everyone's talking about, what if it doesn't hit until after the election, regardless of who wins? Think about that.
Now that is something to think about.
Yep.
It's going to be an exciting couple of months. Until next time, everyone, happy trading.